Merci Madame la Présidente. Alors maintenant, on va passer à la
Thank you ever so much, Madam President. Let's now move on to the first roundtable, where we're going to be asking ourselves exactly what causes people to report or whistleblow. And we have a very impressive panel. I'd like to ask them to come and join me here. So we have Andrew Fishell, alias Cyrus of Chaos, who's a fencer. Charlotte Girard, who's a Secretary General of the IFSO, which is a partner project, so an association which represents referees and sports officials at the international level. Henrique Janus, who's the coordinator of the Polish platform and member of the Polish Sports Ministry. Alice Caron from the French National Olympic Committee. And last but not least, Lorraine Lafrenière, who comes from Canada, and she represents the International Coaching Center for Excellence, and this represents coaches at the world level. So this roundtable is one that we wanted to make as lively and interactive as possible. So I'm going to be asking each one of our panelists to take the floor very briefly, to introduce themselves just a little bit and to ask this question. What can cause people, whistleblowers, to report a case of manipulation or of match fixing? So let me give the floor first of all to Andrew, who will introduce himself, and he'll tell us exactly why he decided to be a whistleblower in fencing and how we were able to work together in such an impressive fashion. So over to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Fishell, but many people in the fencing community know me by my YouTube and Instagram handle, Cyrus of Chaos. I've been deeply involved in the world of fencing for many years, first as an athlete on the men's saber national team from 2009 to 2016 of Team USA, then later as a referee, a coach, and eventually as an advocate for the sport. Fencing has shaped my life in countless ways, and I'm proud to have contributed to making it more accessible by sharing high-level fencing videos with the global community. But today I'm here to discuss something far more serious, an issue that affects the integrity of our sport and the fairness of competition. Over the years, I've witnessed and uncovered patterns of bias, manipulation, and misconduct that threaten the very foundation of the sport of fencing. These issues don't just affect individual athletes, they undermine the trust we place in the systems meant to ensure fair play. I believe it's crucial to speak out, not just for myself, but for the countless athletes, coaches, and fans who want to see the sport remain a place of honor and merit. Today, I'll share my journey, the challenges I've faced in exposing these problems, and the steps being taken to protect the integrity of fencing for future generations. During my time fencing for the national team, I attended numerous World Cups from South Korea to Poland to Venezuela. I was a student of the sport and studied other fencers in the venue. I started to record and publish fencing videos, making high-level fencing accessible to anyone who was interested. For years, stories of unfair decisions in fencing halls, bias, dishonesty, and questionable refereeing were as old as the sport itself. Such issues had long been accepted as part of the sport. The prevailing attitude was, bias happens, not all referees are honest, and you either deal with it or you find another sport. This culture began to shift as video recordings became more common in fencing. The presence of cameras introduced a new level of accountability. Referees had to be mindful of their calls now, knowing that they could be scrutinized online. For a while, this transparency, combined with updated rules, created a more stable and fair environment for the fencers. However, in 2016, a major rule change gave referees significantly more discretionary power. Slowly, bias and something more sinister began to creep back into our sport. In addition to recording, sharing, and analyzing fencing videos, I have served as a hub for the fencing community through my YouTube and Instagram platforms. I highlight impressive actions, offer advice to fencers, discuss various issues broadly within the fencing community, and my ability to analyze fencing is respected worldwide.
The first time I suspected something beyond simple bias was happening was in 2022 when a fencer sent me a video from the Women's Sabre Grand Prix in Orléans. It featured a French fencer against an American.
The referee, a Bulgarian, made several indefensible calls in favor of the American, and although the American did end up losing the bout, the pattern was still very alarming. Shortly after this, I was coaching at a tournament in Madrid where another American fencer delivered an extraordinary preliminary performance, finishing with a plus 27 record. In fencing, pool scores can range from a maximum of plus 30 to a minimum of minus 30, meaning this result of plus 27 was just 3 points shy of perfection, a truly remarkable once-in-a-lifetime achievement. When I mentioned how impressive this was to the other Americans, they shrugged it off, saying that happens every time that Bulgarian referee is in charge of him. Curious, I looked into the Americans' recent pool scores, and the pattern was clear. With the Bulgarian officiating, his average pool score was plus 25. With every other referee, his average pool score was just plus 2. During this time, I was asked to review other matches involving these two Americans, also refereed by the Bulgarian, and always the same troubling calls. Statistical analysis from other individuals in the community also showed an improbable allocation of this referee to these fencers. At the time, I hesitated to speak out. As an active coach, I feared my actions might negatively impact my students who were competing on a global scale. But at the 2023 Cadet World Championships in Plovdiv, Bulgaria, one of my students nearly lost due to bizarre calls made by this same referee. And that moment made me realize, maybe by speaking up, my students would suffer negative consequences, but by not speaking up, my students were already at the mercy of these biased decisions. So I began to speak out incrementally, gradually drawing attention to the issue. Eventually, I decided to go all in, appearing on a popular sports podcast, ESPN's Pablo Torre Finds Out, to detail my observations and suspicions. Each step was daunting, knowing I risked ostracization, but I believed the cost was worth it to address a systemic issue that affects countless athletes beyond myself. During this time, I continued attending World Cups as a coach and a spectator, and to my surprise, my efforts were overwhelmingly supported, not only by coaches and fencers, but by many individuals within the FIE, the International Fencing Federation, including honest referees, many of whom approached me seeking reassurance that I wouldn't criticize them unjustly, and my response to them has always been the same. If you act with integrity, you have nothing to fear. One striking aspect of this experience was the lack of direct resistance. Apart from a few people mentioning to me that some of these Americans were talking about how they were going to sue me soon to anyone who would listen, none of the individuals I named actually made any active attempts to stop me from speaking out. This brings me to Corentin. After hearing my interview on Pablo Torre Finds Out, he reached out to discuss how this issue might impact the Olympics. This was a huge relief because my greatest fear was that honest athletes during the Olympic Games would be negatively impacted by this system. In our meeting, I outlined several specific ways manipulation can occur, the referees most likely to engage in such behavior, and the fencers who seem to benefit the most from this. We concluded that the best way to address this issue was to ensure that problematic referees were kept away from matches involving fencers with history of favorable treatment. After filing an official whistleblower complaint with the French government, Corentin's organization implemented these measures at the Olympics. These safeguards were applied not only to the Americans I mentioned earlier, but to other individuals and countries with similar concerns. The results were very promising. Many people reached out to me to express relief at the absence of problematic refereeing during the Games. Encouraged by this success, efforts are underway through groups like this one to extend this measure to all FIE tournaments. Historically, these issues tend to resurface during the Olympic qualification cycle, then fade out after. We hope to break this cycle. However, Alisher Usmanov, an Uzbek-born Russian oligarch with close ties to Putin, was recently re-elected as president of the FIE in a landslide, despite being sanctioned in a third of the countries with a fencing federation. Due to these sanctions, he is legally barred from entering Switzerland, where the FIE headquarters are located. Because of this inability to run the organization with these sanctions in place, Usmanov has already self-suspended his presidency. With Usmanov's people manning the ship, we cannot expect meaningful change to come from within the organization. As such, much work remains. Some athletes have lost matches and even Olympic opportunities due to the bias, but remain too afraid to speak up. Indeed, the two Americans I alluded to earlier qualified for the Paris Olympics under dubious circumstances. Privately, a few have confided in me about being offered money to throw matches, including some French fencers and coaches. While they refuse these offers, their fear of coming forward is certainly understandable. To those who know this problem exists, I urge you to speak up. Together we can rid our sport and all sports of these injustices. Fear is natural, but my experience shows that more people support this fight than you might think. My love for fencing compels me to stand up for its integrity. For me, that makes the fight worth it. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I really think that it was a great experience to be able to work together and quite quickly build this trust that is so important. What was really great is all the work that you had already done, all the work that we had already done,
ensemble avec le comité d'organisation des Jeux Olympiques aussi, à mettre en place un vrai système de surveillance avec de l'analyse de risque, avec des discussions.
and we managed together with the Olympic Games Organization Committee to implement a real monitoring system with real risk analyses, real discussions, including with the arbitration committee.